Thank you for participating in the NIA and NHLBI Entrepreneur Workshop Series. This workshop covers the topic of licensing and partnering agreements. This breakout room, moderated by Joseph Nixon, discusses the topic of partnerships and collaboration agreements.
Well, maybe while we're waiting for others to join, I'll just introduce myself a little bit further. So again, Joe Nixon, I'm Senior Vice President of Business Development for Locus. My background is really in business development in the pharma industry. I've kind of been on all the different sides of these types of transactions. So I've worked in university tech transfer on the out-licensing side. I've been involved in several different startups that in-license university technology. I've been in the small company where I am now, out-licensing technology to larger companies, and also worked in big pharma on the buy side as well. So I've kind of been involved in these types of transactions from each and every side. So I feel like I understand pretty well, what are the elements that are important to each type of entity, as well as where some of the roadblocks and pitfalls are. There were quite a few questions that came in with the registration. I would say probably 150 or so. They're definitely not going to be able to get through all of them. But I thought that maybe we could start, and Melissa, if you are needing to moderate this, that's fine. Maybe we should just start with the questions that people have who are live on the call here, and then we can move over to the pre-submitted questions if we run out of those.
Sure, that's fine. Do you want me to read the questions out for you?
Oh, well, I was just wondering if anyone who's live on the call wants to ask. Let's start there. You can just raise your hand, do the hand raise from the reactions tab.
And while we give everyone a minute, I just want to thank Joe for joining this time and manage the programs at NIA. And I think we also have Steph Davis in this room who coordinates programs at NHLBI. So thank you, Joe. I know we've interacted a long time ago, actually, when I was with NCI. So nice to see you again. And yeah, thank you, everyone, for coming. And yeah, it's always great to get some discussion. And so any live questions, we'd be happy to take those first.
All right. I see Eleron. Sorry, it's a little hard to read.
Yes, Eleron Hamburger. Hi, how are you? I applied for funds in the January round. I was in the majority, meaning I was in the 88% that generally does not get funded the first time around. So I'm not feeling too bad yet. I did get critiques, but I was not discussed. Which was curious, and the comments seemed off, but not all of them. But the one that I'm really noodling hard on is I have the concept, I have the innovation. None of us were PhDs on the team, so I am now going to hear in the next week or so, in terms of working with my alma mater, they would be doing the research component, both in terms of designing the research to go along with the rollout of the prototype that I was going to build with the funds from the NIA. I'm curious as to in that construction, what kind of an agreement am I really looking for? Is it an in agreement? Is it an out agreement? I think NIA is going to be much happier seeing a robust research partner, but that's really what they're doing. I mean, I could go to a private company, I suppose, but it seemed better to go to my alma mater, who has a family caregiving resource center as part of the institution, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the general question, and I put it in the chat, and there were like 3 or 4 other people attending who seemed to have similar question, and wondering, is Joseph the right room to go to, or what should we be thinking?
So I guess the short answer is I'm not an expert on SBIR and STTRs, so I might not be the right person to answer that. I do think that my understanding, and certainly the NIA people should correct me if I'm wrong, I think for most SBIRs, there is a requirement that there be a company that's been incorporated and that it has a license to the core technology that's being developed. And so I think that would be sort of what Don Rose is talking about in the other room, sort of the license agreement with the university to ensure that you have access to the technology. Now, the way you described it, though, it sounds like you might actually have already had the technology, and you're actually asking the university to do some work on your behalf, in which case it could be a sponsored research agreement, or it could be a fee-for-service agreement, depending on the university's willingness to do that type of agreement. So it's hard to answer in specifics without knowing more. But if the university's if it's the university's technology, the university's intellectual property, and you're trying to bring it out of the university into the company, it would be an in-license. If the company or you personally already have the technology, then the relationship with the university might be a sponsored research or a fee-for-service agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, in terms of, and thank you, Joe, for getting to that. In terms of any questions about, the application or the scoring or how to respond to critiques, those are definitely, you want to email our office, and we'd be happy to get in touch with you and help guide you. So our office's email is nia smallbusiness@mail.nih.gov, mail.nih.gov. So any questions about applications or funding, those we'll do separately from this, but this breakout is really talk about the different types of agreements.
Right. That just was trying to provide context.
No problem.
So maybe I'll take one from the list and then come back to the folks that have their hand up. So one question that I found kind of interesting, downside to strategic versus VC funding. So the way I interpret this is people say strategic funding is, for example, if a small company does a collaboration with a large pharmaceutical company and gets cash and other consideration in exchange for that, or an investment from the corporate venture capital part of a large company, and then VC funding. Probably most of the folks on the list understand what VC is, but venture capital funding. So this would be a professional investment group that invests in early stage companies in order to try to generate returns for their limited partners. So in terms of comparing corporate venture capital to, I'll just say, non-corporate venture capital, they're not necessarily all that different. The type of investment's usually the same. The types of the terms are typically the same. Sometimes corporate venture capital groups are more strategically oriented, meaning that they are looking for assets that match the strategic priorities of the parent company, in which case they might not be, as much investing for financial return. They might be less sensitive to the valuation of the company, for example. But otherwise, pretty much the same between corporate VC and regular VC. But in terms of looking at a strategic partnership versus VC funding in order to bring capital into the company, a lot of times people think of a strategic partnership as being non-dilutive funding. And when I say non-dilutive, I mean that it doesn't impact the equity of the company. So if you sell part of the company to an investor, you're sort of diluting the equity interests of the existing investors and the founders. And some people would say if you're doing a strategic partnership, you're not diluting the company because you're not selling equity. But what you should consider is that you are diluting the company in a different way, and that you're diluting the asset base. If you have a platform technology, for example, and you have just, let's say, 3 different potential assets you could develop off of that platform, and you take the most promising or the one that's furthest along and you license that out to a pharmaceutical company, you might not be diluting the equity value of the company, but you might be diluting the asset base by taking out or encumbering one of the assets that's most promising. So that was a little bit of a unique one that came up, and I wanted to just mention that because sometimes people view big pharma partnerships as being uniformly positive. They're not necessarily. I mean, they can be, but not necessarily. And that dilution of the asset base is a key component. Maybe I'll just go to the top left here, In Vivo Sciences.
Yes, thank you, Joseph. This is Ayla Anlaç. I am one of the co-founders for the company. And my question will be is that we are raising Series A and we are a very similar situation. We have a platform technologies for clinically relevant patient certification. And we also identify utilizing the platform to have a heart failure compound, which is for the preserved ejection fraction, and mostly for aging population right now. Now we are in the discussions with pharma and they're asking us what kind of a deal you are considering. And we don't have any lead investor either. And we need to go into the next stages of 505B, I'm sorry, 505A trials for the clinically. So what is our best bet, most grounded work in your experience for me to be able to tell them as a message assertively right now, because we don't know who might be coming forward. So what is the best approach that I should take in your opinion, a company like that we have right now?
Sure. So to give you a precise answer, obviously I would need to know a lot more about your situation. So maybe I'll just give you some general thoughts, and you can apply them to your situation as you think they are appropriate. So one is if you do have a platform technology and you have multiple assets, if you have the choice, it's often good to try to hold on to full control of the lead asset, meaning the one that's most advanced or furthest along, while maybe trying to find a partner for one of the assets that's second or third or fourth in line for you. And the reason for that is that when an investor is looking at the company, they're going to want to see there being significant value kind of remaining in the company that hasn't already been licensed out or taken out of the company's control. And so if you are able to keep the lead asset and partner a secondary asset, that's a benefit to you downstream when you're trying to raise money from investors. Another thing would be is really to consider to what degree the partner is going to need further input from the company. So is it a matter of simply licensing them the technology and they're going to take it from there, or is there going to be significant additional technology development that's necessary within the licensor, your company? And if it is going to require significant additional development, then that means it's probably going to be some sort of a collaboration agreement, which is certainly much more complex than a straight license, and will have a lot more elements of things that you need to do for them, and timelines and diligence requirements and things like that. And the consideration is going to be, very important for you to work out in terms of making sure that that your costs are covered and that you're frankly making some money off the deal, rather than ending up in a situation where maybe it's actually costing you more than you're getting. And that's not uncommon in a small company, where you might think that because you've been able to do things at a certain pace or with a certain amount of resources up till now, that you can kind of carry that forward into the future. But it might be that once you have that partnership, their expectations and demands and requirements are going to raise the bar so much that it's actually going to cost you quite a bit more than you expected. So think carefully about that. And then I guess the last part, I was kind of hearing an element of timing in the question, which was also one that was several of the questions that came in advance. And the timing question is that there's really no one right answer to that. For the reasons that I described in my overview, there are a lot of benefits to having a partnership beyond just the capital. And so in that sense, sometimes having an initial partnership very, very early can be helpful to a company in terms of establishing momentum, getting that validation, getting access to resources and expertise. But at the same time, especially if the company just has a single asset, partnering very early might really mean that the most of the value ends up going to the partner, and very little stays with the startup company. Maybe I'll just pause there. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it was a good overview. Thank you very much.
All right, you're welcome. The next one I've got on my screen is Natalia. Good to see you again.
So for somebody who was both on the in-licensing and out-licensing sides, so we have a lot of people contacting us in a very large pharma world, contacting us sort of from their innovation VC arm, right? Wanting to talk. So the problem starts with, we have no idea what they're doing because, and they're not willing to sharing information because, and because obviously all of that stuff is locked. And so, they're contacting us, so therefore there's interest, but we have no idea where they're going with this, what's going on internally and all that. And they want to have a lot of information. So how do you know what's intelligence gathering and what's legitimate interest in partnering or investing? Or so how, like, are there signs that you look for, that sort of stuff?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess a couple of things I'll say about that. One is most large companies are not in the business of just going around trying to steal ideas or IP. It's not really good business. It's bad for the reputation. And frankly, most of them are pretty arrogant and they don't really think that they're great ideas outside all the time. And so if they're contacting you, it's more, I would say it's more likely that there's legitimate interest than that it's just intelligence gathering. That said, a few of the signs that I would say would suggest that it is more just intelligence gathering is really around, so for one thing, if they're not willing to sign a confidentiality agreement and they want to have multiple non-confidential discussions, that's suggestive that it might be intelligence gathering, because they will, if they are just trying to gather intelligence, they won't want to have a CDA. They'll want to keep it non-confidential, but try to pepper you with as many questions as they can get away with asking in the meantime. So I'd say that's probably the biggest red flag. It's not uncommon at all to have a single non-confidential conversation first, but if they want to push it to a second or a third or a fourth one, or if in that first conversation, they come with a bunch of people and they're peppering you with a bunch of technical questions, that would be a red flag from my perspective. Non-confidential first call should be one or two people on the other side, really just to kind of screen to see if the technology is in strategy for the company at all. And beyond that, a confidential conversation would be more appropriate. And then, and beyond that, I would say, just kind of doing your own diligence on the firm. Do they have a publicly disclosed internal program that would be competitive with yours? That would be another red flag. But again, for the most part, if they're reaching out to you, it's probably legitimate interest. And congratulations, that's great. Rick Weiss.
Thank you. So we've been working in this field for a while, in SBIRs for a while. We've had a number of successful tech transfer capabilities that we've licensed from some universities, but we've got a unique one that I wanted to just get some feedback on, and I don't know if anybody else is hitting the same kind of idea. So this is, we want to license a database of very unique values, basically, that they've set up. Ongoing, we were going to hire some faculty to migrate the database over time, but we're going to pay them the fees, the labor fees or whatever it is to do that work. But they would like to do not a royalty, but a yearly small license, but still a yearly license on the core initial establishment of the original database. And it seems like it should be more of just a one-time fee to cover that, and not an ongoing fee. And I just wanted to get someone else's opinion that I'm not pushing too hard back, and that's reasonable for me to request a one-time fee to give them that and move on.
Yeah, I guess there's no one answer to that. I mean, I think it's really a matter of the negotiation. But in general, a license would be more appropriate if there's ongoing value over a long period of time. And a one-time fee would be more appropriate, I would say, when the value is pretty fixed in time. For example, if the database is something you use, initially to find something, and then after that, you're not really going back and using it in the future.
Well, we will build on top of it, but we'll fund that initial additional work. So to me, it's like they did this great work initially. We should pay for it, but to request an ongoing fee seems a little, and there's not totally unrealistic. It was a small fee, but still, I don't want a perpetual fee going on forever either. So to me, it seems like let's just pay them for the original work and be done with it. So I just wanted to get
would you have exclusive access to that?
no.
Okay, yeah. So the reason I asked that question is if your access is exclusive, then another reason why the university would want to have that ongoing fee would be to kind of hold your feet to the fire, so to speak, to keep working on it rather than just letting it sit on the shelf. But if it's non-exclusive, then I think you've got probably a decent argument for why you'd rather just pay them, up front. And if you've got the cash to pay them now, that might be best for you long term. But again, it's going to come down to the negotiation.
Yep. Thank you. That's a very basic question, but I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. I apologize for my pronunciation, but Abdulkar?
Yes, Abdul Qadir, yeah. I am representing a biotech early stage company, and we are located in the United States. We work mainly on regenerative medicine. And I had a basic question. Many of our lawyers tell us actually that an NDA agreement with a company that is located outside the United States is probably worthless, factually worthless. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, there are two main reasons for a NDA or a confidentiality agreement. One is to preserve the expectation of confidentiality for the purpose of patent applications. So as people on the phone may or may not know, if an invention has been disclosed publicly, then it's no longer eligible for patent protection in pretty much every jurisdiction around the world. And so you tend to file patent applications. You have to preserve that expectation of confidentiality, which can be done through a CDA or an NDA. Then the second piece is actually trying to keep your information confidential, to keep people from actually exploiting it for their own use or disclosing it secondarily. And I think that the feedback you're getting from your lawyers is probably that as a small company, it's going to be practically very difficult for you to enforce an NDA or to especially for let's say a large company outside the US. And that's probably true. It's probably going to be pretty difficult and expensive for you to take such a company to court in where they are, or to get a US court to give you relief that's valuable. That said, I don't think that even with that, even if that's true, I don't think it's worthless in the sense that it still sets up an expectation and a paper trail between the two companies saying that this material that we're disclosing to you is confidential. If you use it, if you misuse it or you disclose it, then you do have legal liability. It may or may not be that you can actually do anything about it, but it still sets an expectation. And I think that that's important. And certainly if you talk about a large multinational, I mentioned Johnson & Johnson earlier, they don't want to have the reputational risk of getting sued for misappropriating confidential information. That has a cost to them, even though they're almost certainly going to be able to either win the suit or avoid significant payments. There's still that reputational damage. So I think that they're worthwhile doing, even if you don't think you can really enforce them long term. But all that said, I think you get almost all of that value almost regardless of what the NDA actually says. So I wouldn't spend a tremendous amount of time stressing over each and every word in the CDA, because it probably is the case that it's very rarely the case that you're in court trying to enforce an NDA and that results in relief to the company.
Do you think that the legal environment in the United States is better for partnerships and collaborations, or the legal environment in Europe?
I actually don't really have an opinion on that. Most of the almost all the deals I've done have been, based on U.S. law and U.S. jurisdiction for any court proceedings. So I'm not really all that familiar with the European situation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Joe, some of the questions, combining some of the questions coming in live and previously around how and when to deal with a large partner such as a pharma company. So some of the questions come in terms of when is the right time to bring in the pharma? Is it at the Series A? Is it later? How long do those partnerships take to actually get secured and come to fruition? And then, in valuing assets from a startup to for an agreement with the large pharma, how does that valuation occur? Are there any resources, databases that might be able to be used for such evaluation?
Okay, so there's quite a few there. I'll unpack a few of them, and then unfortunately I do have a hard stop at 4, so I'm going to drop at that point. So in terms of the timing, so in terms of how long it takes to get one of these done, the short answer is far longer than you might think. So our transaction with Johnson & Johnson took a full 2 years from first contact to signing the deal. I'm about we're in the late stages of negotiation of another partnership with a big pharma company that by the time it's done will be almost 3 years. And then we have a third big pharma relationship that took about 18 months, but that was just for a very small research collaboration. So they tend to take a long time. Sometimes they can go very fast if there's a particular urgency to hit a year-end deadline, or that there's a really good alignment of interests. But a lot of times there are simply structural issues on the side of the big pharma that make things take a long time, even if there is a lot of interest. And then they have things like strategic realignments and people coming and going and new decision makers that will further delay transactions getting done. In terms of when to try to do one, there's no one answer to that. Again, if the company's assets are maybe a single product, let's say a single small molecule with some backups, that you're trying to develop into a drug, in general, you're going to want to try to partner that as late as you possibly can, because the value increases, I would say, pretty much exponentially as you move forward through development, especially once you get into clinical development. And so you're going to want to try to fund that through equity investments or grants or contracts, and try to hang on to the downstream commercial value of that asset as long as possible. Whereas if you have a platform technology, again, there might be value in doing a very early partnership, very early in the company's life, and very early in the kind of development stages of the technology, in order to get that validation, get that additional capital, get that access to expertise, some of those other non-financial aspects of the deal that I mentioned before. And then I think there was also a part of that question that had to do with valuation and databases. There are a number of databases out there that provide, that really collect public information on transactions that have been done and whatever they can find out about upfront payments and royalty rates and things like that. Here in North Carolina, we have a fantastic resource called the North Carolina Biotechnology Center that is a subscriber to all these databases and a great library staff that can do that work for them. So for North Carolina companies, you can just walk in there. For companies that are outside of North Carolina, you could still send them an email. Just Google North Carolina Biotech Center and look up the library, and you can reach out to them and they can do the work for you. It'll be on a fee for service for companies outside the state, but that's okay. It's still very well worth it compared to trying to access these databases on your own. And then depending on where you are, there might be a similar type of an organization in your area that can provide similar services. But I really don't recommend trying to buy these databases yourself. They tend to be extremely expensive.
I received the download, and thank you very much for posting that. That's really helpful. But I haven't had a chance to really look at it and ask you intelligent questions about it. But one of the things I'm concerned about is like the fee structure. Could you summarize that quickly for us? Like what kind of fees to expect? What kind of fees are reasonable?
So so upfront fees are the first thing that you want to not have, and you can argue that startup companies don't have any cash, so they can't pay that. Then there'll be the fees of the for patent reimbursements, and so there'll be a big bill that's been run up all of a sudden for all the patents, and then there'll be a future patent costs that the university will incur on your behalf that have to be paid. So the question is, how do you structure that? Could you put together a payment plan that shows, that puts it out over several months or over a year or something of that nature? Again, universities want their money, but they are also trying to keep you engaged and keep you paying your fees on a monthly basis. So just because they ask for $10,000 or $100,000 for patent reimbursement, you can always say, can we put that into a payment plan that can be used for payment over a period of time. And the other fees are going to come are milestone fees, so that you have if you file an NDA, for example, you may owe the university a certain fee, or if you complete phase 1 clinical trials, you may have a fee that goes to the university. So those are fees that will be there that have to be budgeted for in the future. And if you're at that stage where you're going into clinical trials, and likely you've got money to do that, and you can cover those sort of fees.
Okay, but for patents, if there's been several patents and the bill is say $100,000, and you want to get go for a clinical trial, so you want to recruit an investor, that $100,000 is a big horse in front of your cart. How do you get started with paying out $100,000 before you have an investor to help you run a clinical trial?
Well, that's what if you've made a good argument that you're the right person to do this, and you've got a team together to do it, and you've got the background, the experience, and you've got a plan in place, and they believe it, and they believe in you and what you're doing, then they should be open to some sort of deferment. So let's put this out 6 months, or let's put this out on a monthly basis. So $10,000 a month for the next 12 months. And that may be a way they can structure that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Jean.
Hello. So I have a question around the royalty for the licensed technology, or in another word, the technology know-how. I saw in the agreement that I'm negotiating with Tech Transfer Office, there's a non-exclusive right for the licensed technology or the know-how, and I'm still paying a royalty for that. Can you talk more about the usual structure that you see for non-exclusive license know-how?
Well, if you can get it exclusive, you're in a much better position, but maybe that's too expensive. I don't know. I mean, yeah, the term should drop off dramatically from, I don't know, a factor of 5, factor of 10, perhaps, from exclusive to non-exclusive, because it gives them the option to license to multiple parties. So just assuming that they can license to 5 additional parties or 3 additional parties, then that's more revenue for them for that. I assume that's what you're talking about when you say a non-exclusive, correct?
No, we have a exclusive license patent, but for the know-how, what they propose is to make it non-exclusive. Do you see that arrangement like normal?
And how are they defining know-how?
They have an appendix that is leave as blank right now, and they would update it.
Yeah.
But for now, it's blank.
Well, it could be that know-how is applicable across other fields and other licenses or other areas And it could be that the faculty wants to consult in that area to another company. It's hard to know exactly without seeing the agreement what the know-how is they're talking about. But it sometimes, even though you license the technology, you still want to have access to the faculty or graduate students or postdocs to get some of the nuance around the technology. Or how do you set up the assays, and how do you do some of that? And maybe that's what they're referring to. It's hard to know right off the bat. But that I would just ask questions. How are you defining it? And B, why is it non-exclusive? And C, what would it take to make it non-exclusive? Everybody has a price, and just curious what it would take.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other questions? Raise your hand. We'll raise your hand buttons on there so I can see the 50 participants. I can't see everybody. Yes, Elleron, Hamburger.
Let me do that. Hi, thank you. I popped over from a different breakout session and had a follow-up question, but I think it's appropriate here. I'm on the gerontology know-how side, but I have a institute and the app development I'm paying for mostly out of pocket. It's an e-health, but the university is going to provide research design the approach component. Like, I know how to develop an app. They're going to try to figure out what they think is a winnable strategy for the NIA in terms of the research design and the ongoing feedback thereafter. So my question is, I think it's a contractual relationship with the university, but the university is interested because they see big dollars, and the deans need big dollars to stay deans and all of that kind of stuff. I'm happy so long as I'm like building the app, and there aren't that many apps out there that are based in science, let's just say it that way, in the general marketplace. So I think it's all worth it, but I was going to be the PI. Maybe we should be joint PIs. Do they own the data, but I own the IT technology? How should I be thinking about this so that I go in, I guess, reasonably? And the one term that I haven't embarked with them, but had issues with the technology folks, is the length of the NDA. Like, so the NDA is not the end all be all, but as a starting point, let's have an NDA. So I said 10 years, and they're like, no way. I mean, 3 years max. And I'm like, well, why? I mean, I know things change, but if it changes, then it's irrelevant. If it's more than 3 years, fine. That'll be, so I don't know, maybe I'm just being unreasonable because I haven't been in this position and I don't know better, but I just feel like I'm coming with critical knowledge, but I'm not the only, Joe in town with a degree in gerontology to be able to come to these conclusions. So I'm trying to figure out how to make this work.
Sure. So 5 years is typical for NDA. So I think that's where your compromise position is there. In terms of kind of negotiating the terms of this kind of agreement, I think the kind of starting point is what value are they bringing to the table versus what value you're bringing to the table. So looking at your scope of work, try to at least delineate some level of value between the two of you. And that's where, you need to differentiate, first of all, is there value on the database and things that they're bringing to the table? And that's, perhaps one of the things. Is there value in the design of the research? That's one thing. And what you're bringing to the table. I think it's if people can define, at least delineate what the value is, then that's good. As opposed to just being a contract research organization. We're going to take, we're going to purify some protein for you, or we're going to sequence some DNA for you. That's valuable, but not high value. That's commodity sort of value, right? So you really need to understand what is the intellectual value, intellectual input that each of you is bringing to the table. And so that would be kind of where I would start on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Giacomo.
Yes, thank you, Don, and thank you for an amazing session today, for real. So what are the typical issues emerging when a startup tries to license technology out from a university? I'm not talking about the negotiation, but the actual issues, trying to understand the issues from the past that may inform.
I think the biggest issue is a lack of communication after the agreement has been signed, and not knowing what's going on and not reporting back and not staying in touch with the university and kind of keeping them engaged. You know, they have a typical 1 year, every year you've got to give us a report on what's happened and that kind of stuff. But, you know, you do yourself a ton of favors by sending them a monthly update on where the company is, challenges you've had, funding, scientific progress, so on and so forth. They love that kind of stuff. They love knowing that you're making progress, or if you're not making progress, why you're not making progress. So when they, you know, haven't heard from you in 2 years and they have to send you that breach letter, you know, no one likes to do that. They don't want to have to do that. They really want to be a partner to a certain extent. So I would say communication is, lack of communication is probably the biggest issue that I've seen between the startups and the TTOs.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. We're going to run this out a few more minutes just to make sure everybody gets, and so some people dropped in late. I dropped into the chat a link to a University Express license from UNC that has some terms built into it. Not all the terms are in there, of course, but you can have a look at that. It's a second PDF link. The first one didn't work, so have a look at that. So Shajar, again, yes, a question.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So you were talking about licensing technology from the university. But let's say you're the inventor. Could you license your technology to the university instead of from them?
Well, if you're an inventor employed by the university,
No, independent, not a student.
The university is not interested in licensing. They got enough technology on their own to deal with. Unlikely they would license something. And now I have heard of a few universities that have done that, and in very special cases where they want to license something in because they think it is really additive, but very, very, very rare.
Okay. All right. That's all my question was. Thank you.
All right. So we have a question here. If university students end up working on the research project, does that introduce additional problems? Yes, it does. First of all, they're inventors, and that does create a conflict in the event that the university licenses the technology out and trying to kind of navigate the faculty and student relationship. It's a little tricky, not impossible, but it happens all the time. Okay. With that, thank you very much for attending, and please fill out the survey form for the workshop to let us know what you thought of this. And there's another workshop coming up in August where we're going to talk about value proposition and how do you differentiate yourself from the competition. So with that, have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.